the Zoom class for today. A continuation of what we were talking about last time. So last time we talked about reflex action, if you can still remember. And we said that a reflex action is an automatic response to a certain stimulus. Automatic, rapid, so that means it is something which occurs very fast and even without you knowing. And then we also mentioned types of reflexes, and we said that we have two main types of reflexes. The first one which we talked about was the simple reflex action, and I also mentioned the other type, which is conditioned reflex action. Now, just to remind you about a simple reflex action, let me share with you a photo here. Showing us the reflex act. Yeah, so if you look at that photo, that diagram there, this is an example, and it is called the withdrawal reflex. The withdrawal reflex. So this is a person withdrawing their hand from a hot object. So we say that if you touch a hot object, then you have to withdraw your hand simply to protect yourself from getting burned. Now, if you look very well, now we have the reflex. We said that the path followed by an impulse during a reflex action is called a reflex act. Reflex act. And I think you can see it is well shown there. So the reflex act simply consists of the neurons which transport or which transmit the impulse. So the red line shows the sensory neuron. You can see it is very long. Actually, a neuron is the longest cell in our bodies. So you can see these cells are very long. So the red line shows the sensory neuron. So the sensory neuron begins right from the hand. This is where we have the receptors, the pain receptors, thermoreceptors, are here. So this is the fire. So immediately you touch, then the receptors, the thermoreceptors here produce impulses which are transmitted via this red line here, which is the sensory neuron. And then we said that the sensory neuron, it has a cell body, but its cell body is outside the CNS. I hope you can see the CNS very well. The CNS is there. You can see the CNS beginning from there, that is CNS. So the cell body is this one here. The cell body of that neuron is outside the CNS. And then inside the CNS, there is the green line there. That green line is the relay neuron. The relay neuron or the intermediate neuron. This just connects. It simply connects the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. So, and then there is a small gap between the sensory, between the red line and the green. There is a small gap there, which is called the synapse. Yes, then the blue line, this one here, is the motor neuron. We say that the motor neuron now takes impulses from the CNS to the effectors. The effectors here, we have the bicep muscles. The bicep muscles, once they receive the impulse, they contract. And that makes you to withdraw your hand. You are able to withdraw your hand from the hot object, motor. Motor, actually, it is called motor because it makes you to have some movement. Motor always bring about some movement. So that is where the name came from. So motor neuron. Yeah, so the whole of this part here, the whole of this part is called a reflex act. The part followed by an impulse during a reflex action. So that is a good example of a simple reflex action. And then we also have some other types of simple reflex. Let me try to show you others. Just mentioning the other types. Yeah, so the first one here, the first one is what I've just talked about. That is the withdrawal reflex. You touch a hot object, then you withdraw your hand. Then the second one here is somebody sneezing. Sneezing always happens. If you don't know, it just happens. It may happen. And that happens when you are exposed to maybe something you are allergic to, dust, for example, or certain chemicals. Then you find you sneeze. Then the other one, so sneezing is a good example also of a reflex action. Then there is also this is the eye, you can see very well. And you can see the eye is like it has been exposed to very bright light. Very bright light. So when your eyes are exposed to bright light, then of course there must be a response. Your eye, we have what we call iris reflex. So remember the iris, we will talk about the eye later. The iris normally controls the size of the pupil. And the size of the pupil now dictates how much light enters into the eye. So in a case where you are in a very bright light, then the iris must see how to reduce the size of the pupil. So in bright light, the size of the pupil reduces, it becomes very small. But when you are in the dim light, the size of the pupil enlarges to allow enough light to get into your eye. But in the bright light, the pupil must reduce in size so that it can reduce the amount of light entering the eye, because too much light obviously can damage your eye. So this one is also a simple reflex, but it is called the iris reflex. The other one here is the knee jerk. It is called knee jerk. Knee jerk. That is also a simple reflex. Now, if you tap your knee, you just sit somewhere. Maybe you can try this one later on. You sit somewhere, and then your leg hangs. Maybe you sit on a table, then your leg hangs. Then you tap. You can see this guy here is tapping the knee here using a phone. So when you tap the knee will move forward like this. It just moves itself without you even knowing. So this is called the knee jerk. So the knee jerk is another good example of a simple reflex action. Yeah, and now, having mentioned that, it is important for you to be able to explain what happens during that. You can be told to explain what happens if a person touches a hot object. Are you able to explain? So you must say it very well. You must outline the part which is going to be followed by the impulse from the time the person touches a hot object and to the time the person withdraws the hand from the hot object. Not only hot objects, the two most common are hot object and a sharp pin. You touch a sharp pin, what happens? Are you able to explain the path which is going to be followed by the impulse until you respond by withdrawing your hand? I think you can see very well that this reflex action, they are important because they enable you to withdraw your body from the painful stimulus. The hot object, for example, you cannot burn and then you continue burning. You just continue putting your hand on the hot fire or on the hot supriya. No, you must withdraw your hand, and that is survival. It enables you to survive. It enables you to withdraw your hand from pain. You cannot, on the other hand, you cannot sit on a sharp pin. Then you continue sitting on the pin, unless there is a problem with your response, how you respond. You will sit there. Then you will feel there is something sharp. Then you stand up immediately, and that enables you to get away or to move away from the painful stimulus. So I want us now to go to the conditioned reflex action. I mentioned this last time, but I said we will discuss it in our next class. So condition is quite different from the simple reflex action. Now, conditioned reflex action is a type of reflex action which is normally brought about through learning. You learn it, and then you must be able to memorize it. I hope you have gotten that. So maybe you have been exposed to a certain type of condition for a very long time, such that you have, with the time, you have learned that kind of condition. Now, for example, always people normally have, you normally eat lunch. Let's use that, you eat lunch. Then you will always realize that ikifika lunch time, unaanza kuishi njaa. Mbona unaanza kuishi njaa? Because you know that ikifika lunch time, this is something you have been doing since you were born. Ikifika around 1 there, you always take lunch. So, unaishi njaa. So, it will always be like that. Hata kama food haiko, utakuwa unaishi njaa hata kama chakula haiko. Why? Because you have used to taking lunch at 1. So immediately 1 ikifika, you will always feel you need food. Even if food is not there, you just feel your body needs food. So you have conditioned yourself that at 1 you must eat.
Malim, we cannot hear you cannot see your video.
Oh, video. Okay. I'll correct it. Yeah, so we are saying that a conditioned reflex action is a reflex action which is normally learned. So you must learn it. I've given an example where you are used to taking lunch at 1. So if you take 1, you will always feel unataka chakula. Now, the other example which I want to give, and which is now the most important one, is it was a kind of experiment, and this was done by somebody called Pavlov. So Pavlov did an experiment. So we have Pavlov. So Pavlov's, it was just an experiment, Pavlov's experiment. So he used a certain kind of dogs to demonstrate conditioned reflex action. I want to again share something here, a photo. Yeah, so you can see the photo I have shared there. So there is a dog here. There is a dog, you can see that. There is a dog. Then it seems the dog is salivating, as you can see that. Then there is a bell. Bell is there. Then kuna chakula hapo. So what this guy did, he used to ring the bell every time he wanted to feed is dogs. Now, this happened for a very long time. Now, the presence of food obviously makes the dog to begin to salivate because the dogs know there is something to enjoy. So every time the dogs were to eat, this guy could ring the bell. So when the dogs heard the sound of the bell, they knew there is food. So it reached a time when, so long as he rang the bell, the dogs begin to salivate because the dogs knew they are going to eat. So even if there was no food and the dogs heard the sound of the bell, they begin to salivate because they know they are going to eat, but there is no food. So why is this an example of a conditioned reflex action? Now, with the time, the dogs learned to associate the ringing of the bell and the food. They learned and they conditioned their bodies that once they hear the sound of the bell, they know they are going to eat. And therefore, they began to salivate, even if food was not brought yet. They just, so long as there is bell ringing, the dogs begin to salivate. So this is a good example of a conditioned reflex action in that the dogs learned to actually replace the food now with the sound of the bell. So the sound of the bell now would now make the dogs to begin to salivate. So you can see it is a condition. It is something which has happened for a long time to the dogs, such that they have learned to associate the ringing of the bell and the food. Yes, just the way you associate sasaba na food. You know, if it reaches 1, then you are going to eat. Unaanza kuishi njaa. So you'll always feel una njaa, even if there is no food at that particular time. So that is what happens here. The dogs, so long as the bell is rung, they begin to salivate, even if food is not available. So that is a conditioned reflex action. So in conditioned reflex, for it to develop, it is something you must learn. You must learn it, and the stimulus must be repeated for a very long time for it to happen. So that is why we say it is conditioned. You must learn it. Then you must also be able to remember it. So it is brought about by learning and memory. That is conditioned reflex, learning and memory. Yeah. So that is about conditioned reflex action. Now I want us to look at a comparison between the two. What are the differences between simple reflex action and conditioned reflex action? Simple reflex action and conditioned reflex action. So in simple reflex action, we say that just exposing part of the body to the stimulus, then it happens. You immediately withdraw. So in simple reflex action, you need just a single stimulus. A single stimulus brings about the response. That is about the simple reflex action. What about the conditioned reflex action? I've just given an example of the dog, the ringing of the bell. So I said that this must happen for a very long time. If at all you want the dogs to associate the ringing of the bell and the food, you must do it for a very long time for the dogs to learn it. So you need repeated stimulus to bring about that kind of response. So that is a clear difference between conditioned reflex action and simple reflex action. And then the other difference is that simple reflex action does not need any experience, any prior experience. It doesn't need. When you touch something hot, you withdraw your hand. So it doesn't need experience to withdraw your hand from the hot object or to withdraw your hand from the sharp pin. No experience needed there. You just withdraw. How about the other one? In the conditioned reflex, you must modify behavior. So this depends on experience. I hope that is very clear. This depends on experience. For it to happen, you must, that is why we said it relies much on memory. I hope it is clear up to that point. So those are differences between simple reflex and conditioned reflex action. Okay, now I want us to move on and talk about something else now. I have talked about the reflex action, the two types which we have. Now I'm moving to something else, and I want to just something small, that is transmission of a nerve impulse. And under transmission of a nerve impulse, we will talk about two things, that is resting potential and action potential. Resting potential and action potential. So you simply need to know what these ones are. What is a resting potential and what is an action potential? Now, we said that the impulse is being transmitted by a nerve fiber, and a nerve is just a structure which can be very long that transmits an impulse. If we have, for example, you know the motor neuron. So this axon here is the nerve fiber which transmits an impulse. So the question is, how does it happen? So we have two things during the transmission of an impulse along an axon. We have what we call resting potential, then we have what is called an action potential. Now, what is a resting potential? Now, a resting potential simply refers to when a nerve fiber is not transmitting any impulse. It is at rest. It is not transmitting anything. There is no stimulation. So such a nerve fiber is said to be at a resting potential. Now, we normally talk about two ions which normally aid in the transmission of a nerve impulse. We have sodium ion, and we also have potassium ion. These are important during the transmission of a nerve impulse. So during resting potential, we normally say that the nerve fiber is polarized. Polarized means we have, if it is like this, I'm drawing it so that it appears bigger. So we will be having a lot of sodium ion outside, and a lot of potassium ion inside. A lot of potassium ion inside. Yeah, and we also have potassium ion, and we also have chloride ion. So during this, we say that the nerve fiber is polarized. So just know the meaning of resting potential. I've just said that this is when a nerve fiber is not transmitting an impulse, and therefore it is at rest. Now the other one, which I want also to mention, is called an action potential. So an action potential means when a nerve fiber is transmitting or is stimulated, that means there is an impulse which is being transported or transmitted in the nerve fiber. Yeah, so during this, we normally say that the nerve fiber is depolarized. Polarized was under resting potential, but now depolarized is under action potential. So what happens during this? Sodium ions are pumped. Sodium ions are normally pumped actually inside. They were outside during resting, but now during this, during this action potential, they are pumped inside. There is what we call active sodium pump. So that pumps sodium ions inside. So if I'm to draw this, something like this, then we can normally show this using some kind of graph. So we have resting potential and action potential. This is action potential. This is just the action potential. Then here to kuna resting. Hapa pia ni resting. So just know that you only need to know the difference between the action potential and the resting potential, even without going much into detail. So resting potential ni hapa. The nerve fiber is at rest, not transmitting any impulse. Then action potential, you can see sasa the curve as there is an increase. So this is action potential. So just know the difference between those. Now I want to move from there and talk about something small because I can also see time is moving. I want to talk about what we call a synapse. I want to talk about a synapse. Synapse. So a synapse is actually a junction between two neurons, and it is like this. This is a synapse. A synapse. So we have, this is the axon, remember? This is part of the axon. Now, let me illustrate something here using the motor neuron. Those are dendrites. This is the dendrite of a neuron. So at the end of a dendrite, we normally have certain swellings. You can see the swellings. These swellings are called synaptic knobs. Synaptic knobs. So the synaptic knobs, so this is synaptic knob. This swelling is a synaptic knob. Here is another synaptic knob, but of another neuron. In is synaptic knob of another neuron. So the impulse, let's say it is coming from there. So the impulse must come here, then it crosses here, then it comes to the other neuron, which is this side here. So this boundary here is what we call a synapse. Synapse. So this one, is called a synapse, a point of connection between two neurons. So this swelling, synaptic knob, this other one, synaptic knob. But this one can simply be called pre-synaptic knob. Then the other one is post-synaptic knob. So we have pre, then we have post. Now there is a membrane here of this synaptic knob. There is another membrane here of the other synaptic knob. So we have pre-synaptic membrane, post-synaptic membrane. I hope you have gotten that. Pre-synaptic membrane, post-synaptic membrane. And then inside here, we have what we call synaptic vesicles, certain sac-like structures. They are sac-like structures which contain certain kind of chemicals, which we are going to talk about. So the impulse comes here, then the impulse must cross. But now the question is, how does it cross? Now the arrival of an impulse at the synapse here, so long as imefika in this part here, which is the pre-synaptic knob, it stimulates. So inside here we have this one is the synaptic vesicle, the swelling, the small swelling. So the arrival of an impulse here stimulates this. Yes.
4 minutes remaining.
Okay, I'm just about to wind up. Yeah, so long as an impulse arrives here, it will stimulate these synaptic vesicles to stimulate a certain chemical, which is normally called a neurotransmitter substance. So that neurotransmitter substance is now what carries an impulse across. It diffuses. So as it diffuses across the synapse, it carries the impulse over to the post-synaptic membrane. Once it reaches here, it stimulates what we call an action potential. I said an action potential is when the nerve fiber is activated or is stimulated. So once the neurotransmitter substance crosses over with or carrying with it an impulse, it will stimulate this post-synaptic membrane, and then an axon potential will be generated, and then the impulse will continue being transmitted along the nerve fiber, but now of the other neuron. Now that is what happens at a synapse. A gap between two neurons, but it allows an impulse to cross from one neuron, this is one neuron, to the other neuron. I hope you have gotten that, unless there is a question. You can see I only have 2 minutes remaining. I'll give you 2 minutes to ask a question, whether it is about a synapse. Yes. Any question, maybe about a synapse?
Anyone with a question?
So it seems there is no question.
If you have a question, you can raise up your hand. In case you have a question, raise up your hand. Mwalimu, decimos de okay.
Okay.
Yes, you can sum up your
So
lesson.
I think we'll end. I think we can end there. Now, what remains is now you. I hope you have the notes. So what remains you to read and understand very well what we have discussed today. Make sure you do that. Next time when we meet, I'll be asking you questions about what you have learned today. So make sure you read more and understand. If it is a synapse, how does the impulse get transmitted across the synapse? Read that and understand very well, because I will ask you a question next time. What is the difference between an action and resting potential? Read that. And now the last one, read about also the conditioned reflex, because I will ask you questions when we meet next time. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time and for cooperating during this lesson. Thank you. Until we meet next time. Bye.